The slap was quick and precise, a single crack of sound that cut through a room already brittle with tension. Candles waited unlit on a cake that tasted like obligation. A new watch flashed on a wrist that had never lifted grocery bags, and my cheek burned, while the quiet after rang louder than the strike itself. In that breathless stillness, I saw years layered like dust on a tablecloth. First my father, then Richard, now my son, each expecting me to fold. When Tyler's hand fell back to his side, and he sneered that I should be grateful he still visited something inside me, refused to kneel again. I was 62, 3 years into retirement after 35, behind the front desk of a public school where I learned names faster than birthdays and kept the hallways running with a smile and a stapler. The house creaked over me like an old friend with a bad knee, reminding me the roof needed $4,800 I didn't have. Since Richard died 8 years earlier, I had kept routines as a life raft, same blue-striped tablecloth, same apricot jam for tea, same quiet thank yous to an empty chair, while Tyler, 38 and newly single, drifted from my back house to my kitchen, as if doors weren't boundaries. He called me Mom when he wanted comfort, and Eleanor when he wanted control. At 6:10 p.m. on my birthday, he wanted both his favorite beer and my silence. Dorothy, my neighbor, with a practical heart, stood near the sink and watched me watch him. She'd been telling me for years I deserved more than the grindstone of other people's demands. I kept defending him the way women defend storms, because the thunder feels familiar. That evening, I smoothed the tablecloth and said as nicely as a person can, while speaking to the edge of a cliff, that I needed help with household expenses. He laughed cruel and clean, then told me I made more than he ever did. He gestured at the food too dry, Mom, and when I mentioned the new car, and the promotion, and the leaking roof, his hand flew. I felt it in my teeth and in the years I had lost to appeasing men who called me fragile when what they meant was obedient. We didn't know Amber stood in the doorway with her phone. She was Tyler's girlfriend of 3 months, soft voice, steady eyes, the kind of young woman who notices everything and speaks only when it matters. She recorded the 30 seconds that changed my life. In the video, I looked stunned and older than the mirror claimed each morning. Tyler looked like a stranger I'd fed without ever seeing. He left with a slam and a laugh, and the house thudded back into silence where Dorothy washed dishes at 7:05 p.m., the faucet filling the shape of things we didn't say out loud. "This can't continue," she whispered, and I felt a door open somewhere in my chest that had been sealed since I learned how to keep the peace by erasing myself. The next morning, at 8:10 a.m., my ancient computer hummed like a reluctant confession. An email blinked from Amber Stevens apologizing to Mrs. Watson and asking to call me Eleanor. She attached the video saying she'd grown up watching violence dressed as love and could recognize the cost even when it wore a son's face. While the footage played time, separated into 2 women, the one who'd been hit and the one watching that woman with something like pity and a rising, painful compassion. When the phone rang at 8:22 a.m., Amber told me she had posted the clip privately to warn friends, and one share turned into many. She worried for my safety and my privacy. She sounded like she had already chosen dignity and was offering me a hand up. By 10:00 a.m., my phone was jangling with unknown numbers. Dorothy texted that the video was spreading across platforms with headlines about elder abuse and toxic families. The grocery store felt like a stage when a stranger touched my sleeve in the cereal aisle and said her sister had been me once. I nodded, words trapped under old habits. At 2:40 p.m., Tyler burst in, the video open on his screen and fury glittering around him like broken glass. He accused me of orchestrating his humiliation. I told him I hadn't posted it, and for the first time my voice didn't reach for the middle ground. It held. He stepped forward, and Dorothy stepped between us with the phone already dialing. He scoffed and left rattling the door the way boys rattle toys they can't keep. That evening at 6:15 p.m., an attorney named Marlene called to say she specialized in elder rights and wanted to help. She said people had begun a small fundraiser to fix my roof and that she'd take my case pro bono if I needed a restraining order. I stared at the window while the sun slid down the neighborhood roofs, light catching dust like tiny certainties in the air. The house sounded different in that gentle hour, more like a place I lived than a museum of my concessions. When Tyler returned to bluster about his employer's investigation and his suspension pending review, I told him to leave by the end of the day. He looked at me as if someone had redrawn the map. He left, and the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was available. 2 nights later, at 9:05 p.m., after the fundraiser hit $8,500 and a crew scheduled the roof for the following week, I climbed into the attic to clear a path for the work. Dust rose like ghosts around the old holiday boxes, and in the far corner, I found a carton of my mother's things. Margaret died when I was 15, leaving me to my father's precision and cold pride. I had never read her journals because surviving took all my literacy. I opened one and found a voice I recognized across decades. She'd saved money in coat linings and shoeboxes, whispering plans onto paper to take me away. Inside a sealed envelope addressed to me, she wrote that love was not submission and that I should not repeat her silhouette. I cried with the soft, shocked grief of someone meeting the mother she never knew. Dorothy climbed the ladder and sat beside me among the boxes. We read in the thin light and passed the letter back and forth like a lantern. When we went downstairs at 9:40 p.m., I washed my face, framed my mother's note, and propped it by the bed. The blinking light of my phone pulsed with messages. One from Amber checking on me. One from Marlene confirming a time at 11:30 a.m. tomorrow. The house groaned in its familiar way, but I heard something underneath a new timbre in its voice. Somewhere between a slap and a letter, I had remembered that I was not a piece of furniture, but a person whose life still had edges I could choose. 3 weeks after Tyler left, the roofers hammered fresh shingles into place at 8:15 a.m., each strike echoing like punctuation in a sentence I had waited decades to write. With the fundraiser money, I had enough not only to fix the leaks, but to paint the living room the bright yellow Richard had always vetoed. I cleared the shelves of photographs where I stood like background furniture, rearranged the chairs for my own comfort, and bought a scarf Dorothy said brought out my eyes. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman standing there, her shoulders not hunched, but squared. For the first time in years, I was making choices without permission slips. Amber began checking on me regularly, sometimes with shy text messages late at night, sometimes with short visits to sit on my porch. She was only 24, yet carried the steady kind of strength I wished I'd had at that age. She told me she'd grown up with a father who treated her mother badly, and she had sworn never to excuse cruelty again. Our unlikely friendship grew from shared understanding. In writing classes at the library, another woman named Gloria encouraged me to put words to feelings I had long kept hidden. "You have a voice, Eleanor," she said after one of my essays made the class cry. "It's just been waiting for you to use it." Tyler, meanwhile, vacillated between rage and half-hearted apologies in the messages he left on my phone. He had found a new job that paid less than his old one, and his expensive habits were collapsing under the weight of his choices. For once, I did not rush in with solutions. Instead, I wrote. My instructor asked us to compose a letter to our younger selves, and I found myself telling the timid girl, who grew up apologizing for existing, that silence was not peace, and boundaries were not selfish. Writing those words made me shake, but when I read them aloud in class at 6:45 p.m. that Thursday, I felt something lift from my chest. Marlene, the attorney who had called me after seeing the viral video, became another ally. She phoned each week to update me on elder rights legislation and to check on my case. One evening, at 7:10 p.m., she asked if I would consider speaking at the senior center about my experience. The old me would have politely declined, terrified of attention, but I heard myself say, "I think I'm ready." The idea of standing before others still frightened me, but so had asking my son for rent, and I had survived that. Then, an unexpected email arrived. The sender's name was Claire Bennett, a stranger claiming to have important information about Richard. My first instinct was to delete it, but the tone was formal serious. Curiosity outweighed caution, and I agreed to meet her at a cafe. Dorothy came with me steady as always. At 2:00 p.m., sharp Claire walked in impeccably dressed, her eyes startlingly familiar. They were Richard's eyes. She explained that she was Richard's daughter from a relationship he had before me, one he had kept secret throughout our marriage. She slid a manila envelope across the table, and inside, I found photographs and documents proving years of betrayal. He had told Claire I was controlling, that I had prevented him from seeing her. She grew up resenting me for lies he invented. Worse, he had diverted nearly $175,000 from our joint savings into accounts under her name. She said she wanted no part of the money now. She simply wanted to set things right. My heart should have broken under the weight of it, but instead, I felt clarity. Richard's absences, his business trips, the unexplained expenses, it all made sense. Claire told me she had also known Tyler briefly years earlier, when he interned at Richard's firm. Neither of them realized then that they were half-siblings. She looked at me with regret, saying she had spent years hating a woman who never existed. Dorothy squeezed my hand, and for once, I didn't feel shame, only anger at the decades stolen from me. We called Marlene together from the cafe. She said recovering the diverted funds would be complicated, but possible, and Claire's testimony would help. Claire hugged me before we parted. "I'm glad to finally meet the real Eleanor," she whispered, and I believed her. On the walk home, Dorothy remarked that life has a cruel way of revealing secrets only when we are ready to bear them. I thought about my mother's letter, about cycles repeating themselves, and I vowed not to be silent anymore. In the weeks that followed, I grew stronger in small ways. I practiced saying no to Tyler's manipulative texts. I accepted Claire into my life cautiously, but honestly. I attended my writing classes faithfully, each piece digging deeper into truths I once buried. When Jessica Tyler's ex-wife called one afternoon, she brought another layer of revelation. She told me that during their marriage, Tyler had described me as needy and manipulative, projecting his own cruelty onto me. She also showed me documents proving he had forged my signature to obtain a $35,000 loan in my name. The collection calls that I had once brushed aside were not mistakes, they were his lies. Amber, seated beside me at my kitchen table, called it fraud outright. Marlene recommended bringing in a specialist, a former police officer named Howard Jenkins. He investigated quietly and uncovered a disturbing pattern. Tyler had been defrauding friends, colleagues, and nearly even his employer. Most chillingly, he had prepared documents attempting to transfer my house into his name under the guise of tax protection. When Howard laid out the evidence in front of me at 8:50 p.m., with Jessica, Amber, and Claire present, I felt the old question rise. How had I not seen it? Howard looked at me with kind eyes and said, "Manipulators target people with good hearts, then convince them it is their fault." His words loosened a knot I had carried for 60 years. By summer, I was meeting with Howard often, not only about legal matters, but over tea in my garden. He told me about his own life, how a crooked business partner had left him nearly penniless at 50. His honesty built a bridge of trust. "Strength doesn't always feel powerful in the moment," he said one evening as the sun dipped low. "Sometimes it's just choosing not to collapse." For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't collapsing. The plan began on a humid Sunday afternoon at 2:00 p.m. Tyler arrived at my house expecting a private reconciliation. Instead, he walked into a room filled with the people who had seen through his games: Claire Amber, Jessica Dorothy, and Howard. Even Marlene had taken time from her crowded schedule to sit quietly at the corner of my yellow-painted living room, a legal folder resting on her lap. Tyler's confidence faltered the moment his eyes scanned the group. He tried to mask his surprise with a smile, but his voice cracked when he asked, "What is this?" I asked him to sit, my tone calm but firm. For years I had been the one trembling in the face of confrontation, but that day his uncertainty gave me strength. We did not attack him. We told the truth. One by one, each woman shared what he had done, Jessica describing the financial control and intimidation in their marriage, Amber recounting the night of the slap and the months of manipulation, Claire revealing his attempts to exploit her professionally. Howard laid out documents and recordings, proving the forged loan and plans to transfer my house. Each fact landed with the weight of stone, leaving Tyler no room for denial. At first, he lashed out, calling us conspirators, trying to ruin him over a stupid video. But when Howard methodically pushed the evidence forward, his forged signature, his own messages, the fraudulent loan applications, Tyler's protests, weakened. I showed him my mother's diary and the letter she had left for me, connecting the line of abuse that stretched from my grandfather to my father, from Richard to him. My voice did not rise, it steadied. "When does it end?" "Tyler," I asked, "how many generations must repeat this?" For the first time since he was a child, Tyler had no immediate answer. His shoulders slumped. His eyes darted for escape. I told him gently that we had enough evidence to pursue serious legal action. But I also offered him a choice: consistent therapy, restitution to those he had harmed, and a chance to rebuild on honest ground. If he refused, we would proceed legally. Marlene confirmed it without hesitation. Tyler stood pacing like a cornered animal, then muttered he needed time. I told him to take a week, not more. His silence as he left was louder than all his earlier shouts. In the weeks that followed, I braced myself for retaliation. Instead, Tyler surprised me. Slowly, awkwardly, he accepted therapy. The process was rocky. He relapsed into anger, vanished for days, then re-emerged with apologies that finally sounded less like manipulation and more like acknowledgement. He found a modest apartment and a low-paying job. At 7:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, he left an envelope on my porch containing his first restitution payment and a note saying he didn't expect quick forgiveness but wanted me to know he was listening at last. Meanwhile, my own life expanded. The fraudulent loan was nullified after Marlene and Howard's careful work, and the long process to recover Richard's diverted funds advanced with Claire's help. We expected around $120,000 to be restored to me. Amber and Jessica, inspired by their own journeys, began a support group for people leaving manipulative relationships, using my living room as their first meeting place. I joined them some evenings, marveling at how shared pain could knit strangers into allies. Howard became a constant presence. He fixed a broken step on my porch, carried groceries when my arms ached, and more importantly, treated me with a respect I had rarely known from a man. We spoke often about our pasts, our mistakes, our slow rebuilding. One evening, at 8:30 p.m., sitting on the porch swing he had installed, he told me that courage often looks like standing still, when every instinct tells you to bow. His hand brushed mine, not claiming, but offering, and I let it stay. I continued my writing classes, channeling decades of silence into memoir. When my instructor suggested publication, I laughed at the absurdity. But then a small local press showed interest, and the thought no longer seemed impossible. "Your story matters," Gloria insisted. "Not just to you, but to anyone trapped in the same silence. By autumn, Tyler was showing signs of progress. His therapist confirmed that while the journey would be long, he was beginning to recognize patterns instead of denying them. He attended one of Amber and Jessica's support meetings, sitting quietly at the back. He even asked me once awkwardly about my writing class, as if testing the waters of genuine curiosity. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. 6 months after our intervention, the settlement papers from Richard's accounts arrived. $120,000 was officially mine. Claire celebrated with me, insisting she no longer saw me as the enemy, but as the family she had been denied. Dorothy raised a toast with lemonade on my porch, proud tears shining in her eyes. Howard stood beside me, steady and warm, and for the first time in decades, I felt financially and emotionally secure. The following spring, on my 63rd birthday, my house filled with people who truly valued me. Dorothy, Claire, Amber, Jessica, Marlene, Gloria, and my classmates from writing group crowded around the table. Howard stood at my side, his weathered hand holding mine with quiet certainty. Tyler was there too, subdued, but present, holding a leather-bound album filled with letters from people who said my published memoir had given them courage. He placed it in my lap and whispered, "You're changing lives, Mom." The candles flickered on the cake, but this time their glow felt like a promise instead of a mockery. As I drew a breath to make my wish, I knew I had already claimed it, a life not defined by submission, but by boundaries, dignity, and love freely given. The evening air on my 63rd birthday was soft and golden, the kind of twilight that makes even the most ordinary garden glow. After the guests left, only Dorothy, Claire, Amber, Jessica, and Howard lingered. We sat on the porch while laughter from earlier still echoed faintly in the rooms behind us. The house, once heavy with silence, now vibrated with life. Tyler had gone home earlier, quieter than I had ever seen him, leaving behind the album of letters that now rested on my lap. Each page carried a stranger's voice, thanking me for telling my story, for showing them that silence could be broken. My memoir had reached further than I ever imagined, and Claire had helped ensure the story was handled with dignity. Howard leaned back on the porch swing he had built for me, his arm brushing mine in a gesture so natural it startled me. He didn't propose in the old-fashioned sense with rings and promises of forever. Instead, he offered something I had never truly had: a partnership of respect. "You've shown me what courage looks like," he said softly, his weathered hands holding mine. "I never thought I'd find this kind of connection at our age." My throat tightened, but not with fear. I realized I wanted to step into this next chapter, not as someone's servant or shadow, but as someone finally whole. Later that week, Claire came by with the final settlement papers. $120,000 from Richard's secret accounts was officially restored to me. She insisted I deserved it more than she ever would. "He lied to both of us," she said, her voice steady but mournful. "But maybe we can choose truth now." She had begun calling me her second mother, and though the word startled me at first, I let it settle. It felt like reclaiming something both of us had been denied. Amber and Jessica's support group grew rapidly. Women and men who had lived under manipulation came to share their stories. Sometimes I sat in the circle quietly listening. Other times I spoke about the attic, my mother's hidden journal, the letter that told me not to repeat her mistakes. I framed that letter above my writing desk so it would always remind me submission is not love and silence is not peace. Tyler's progress was slow but genuine. Therapy was breaking through his defenses bit by bit. He still stumbled into old habits, but he returned to them less often and with visible shame. He had taken a modest job, traded his luxury car for something practical, and rented a small apartment where he had to pay his own bills. He made his restitution payments on time, each one accompanied by a short note acknowledging the harm he had done. In one of his letters, he admitted that growing up under Richard had shaped him more than he ever realized. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I want to be better than him. Better than I've been." For the first time, I believed he might mean it. Howard became woven into my daily life. He helped repair the old gate-planted tomatoes in the garden and shared stories over tea. Sometimes we sat in silence, watching the sun dip low, our companionship needing no words. The trust we built came not from grand gestures, but from small consistencies, something I had never experienced in my earlier years. Dorothy teased us gently, but her eyes shone with relief. She had worried for so long, and now she saw me not just surviving, but living. One evening, at 7:20 p.m., as I prepared a speech for the senior center, I thought of my younger self. The girl who had apologized for everything, who mistook endurance for love. I wanted her to know that it was possible to change even after decades. When I stood at the podium days later, my voice steady and sure, I looked into the faces of people who had carried their own hidden bruises. "It is never too late to draw a boundary," I told them. "Never too late to say no, and never too late to begin again." When Dorothy asked me later what I wished for while blowing out the candles, I told her the truth that we all learn to choose love with respect, not love that requires us to kneel. For the first time in decades, my birthday cake tasted sweet. The slap that was meant to silence me had in the end freed my voice. My mother's letter, hidden for decades in the attic, had traveled forward in time to guide me out of the shadows. Tyler's downfall had become the unlikely beginning of his change. Richard's betrayal had given me an unexpected ally in Claire. And the viral video that had humiliated me had opened doors I never thought I would walk through. Life rarely gives us what we expect, but it always gives us the chance to become who we should be. If my story helps even one person recognize their worth, set their boundaries, or find the courage to leave silence behind, then everything I endured was not wasted. Thank you for being here with me. If this story touched, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters,